Good to see everybody tonight. Thank you for joining us. We are in the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to end chapter 2 tonight. Just got a couple of things we want to talk about as it relates to chapter 2. Maybe look at those review questions for a few minutes, and then we'll get into chapter 3 and continue our discussion of the things that the wise man shares with us here in the book of Ecclesiastes. It is, I always say it's good to see everyone. Sometimes it's particularly that way when a number of our folks are under the weather, and so it's good to see at least a handful of healthy folks able to be out. We use that phrase. I need to look that up, by the way, where this phrase under the weather came from. Aren't we all technically under the weather all the time? But anyway, good to see you tonight. Let's bow our heads together, if you would, and share in a prayer before we start. Our Father in heaven, thank you. You bless us, you honor us, you give us your grace and your mercy through your Son. Thank you for even this opportunity that we have to study your word, to appreciate your testimony, and particularly in the book of Ecclesiastes, the wisdom of a man who experienced everything in life and still concluded vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And so help us to appreciate why that is. Help us to glean from his understanding of the world and what's really important in our lives and how we can focus our attention upon you and gain the benefit of that. Strengthen us in our service and our worship and our study of your word this evening. Guide us in all that's right and good. And we pray this through Christ's name. Amen. Okay, so he talked about pursuing all kinds of things, right, in chapter 2. And after he pursued anything and everything that his mind set to pursue, emptiness, right? Vanity. No value in any of it. Even when you did honorable work, you wore yourself out, you stayed up at night thinking and worrying about all those things. And he said, you did all that, then you what? Yeah, then you die. And it just goes into somebody else's hands, and you have no idea what they're going to do or how they're going to behave as it relates to those things. And so every time he thought that he had a lane, a path that he could pursue that would bring the joy he was looking for, bring the pleasure he was looking for, bring the sustainability that he was looking for, whatever it might be, no matter what it was, it all kind of ended the same. Even when he recognized that wisdom is better than folly, right? Wisdom is better than folly. But even the wise man and the foolish man end up at the same end, right? And so he gives all these warnings, these perspectives, if you will, after his life pursuits had kind of concluded and what he thought about it. Just notice with me here at the end of the chapter, verse 24. There is nothing better for a man that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. When does real enjoyment of the things in life, the things we work for, and the labor that we might even have to put into it, when does the real benefit come? When we appreciate what? Yeah, so that from where it came, right? When we appreciate the fact that it wasn't about my labor, it wasn't about my skill, it wasn't about the wisdom that I gained, it didn't have anything to do with me. The real joy came when we just realized that every perfect gift, the New Testament writer says, comes from the hands of God. And so, okay, enjoy and appreciate what you have. Enjoy and appreciate the fruits of your labor, so long as you and I recognize that has to do with the hand of God, not with our own power, our own abilities, and our own skill sets. For just read the rest of it. For who can eat, or who else can hasten hereunto more than I? For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he giveth travail, to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. It's an interesting kind of ending, if you will, to this whole conversation. Because the temptation might be that if everything just kind of ends the same, right? And he's kind of made that point, that if everything just kind of ends the same, and there's a wise man and a foolish man, but they both die, right? They both eventually have an end. There seems to be benefit in certain things, but even wisdom can become empty and vain, right? There are good things that he references that he acknowledges that didn't quite level up to what he's expecting. And here's the point. The temptation might be to go, why bother, right? Why bother doing anything good if the end result of good and evil are both vexation of spirit, then why bother? If both good and evil end at the same ending place, then the temptation might be when you hear that is, then why bother being good? If there's no end result benefit from that. And so I think the writer here in his wisdom, after he goes on, for lack of a better word, on this rant of how he had pursued anything and everything his eyes and hearts and mind desired to pursue, and it still didn't amount to anything. And then here comes the caution. Don't forget, though, that wisdom is still better than folly. Don't forget, though, that it's okay to appreciate the results of hard work so long as you remember that it was the hand of God that provided it. Don't think for a minute, the writer says, that the sinner, the evildoer, somehow has an advantage or even an equality with those who try to do the things that God wants from them in the right ways. Don't misstate or misunderstand the point of what I'm teaching, is what the writer's saying. I'm not encouraging you to abandon all that's good because I've been frustrated by some of these things in life. The end result still remains that righteousness is better than sinfulness, and good is still better than evil, and wisdom is still better than folly. You've just got to understand all of that in perspective and keep a mindset and understanding that that is good comes from the hands of God, and we need to recognize Him in that process. Any leftover thoughts you might have from chapter 2? I always frustrate myself when I leave 2 or 3 verses left at the end of a text. Jump into the questions real quick. I'll throw them to you on the screen as best I can. And just go through these questions for chapter 2 by way of review. So what experiments does the preacher undertake to find meaning in life? He listed a bunch of them. Pleasure, wine. Yep. Had people serving him. Gardens, parks, houses, right?
We learned later, women.
Yeah. If it's Solomon, then he pursued that to his own demise.
He didn't mention it here,
but we know that from other texts. Sure. Yeah. We talked about the fact that he had the first version of Spotify. Right? He didn't have it on an app. What he had was singers just sitting there waiting on him to call for him to sing, and he'd say, "Hey, I need a song," and their job was to get up and sing before the king. And so if you name it, he had it. If it was something that could be experimented with, he experimented with it. If it was a piece of wisdom that could be gained in human form, he gained it. There wasn't anything that he didn't pursue. And his effort to find the meaning of life, and the meaning of life was staring him in the face the whole time, right? It was the God who had provided with him the godly wisdom that he had gotten when he was a young king in this process. It was there all along. He even admits it. He says, that wisdom never left. I just chose to pursue a whole bunch of other things that clouded the wisdom that God had provided me. How does he evaluate pleasure and wealth and all these accomplishments? Yeah, it's empty. It didn't turn out to be anything like he had thought it would be. So why does the preacher conclude that wisdom is better than folly, yet still vanity? There's one basic reason for that, by the way, that he gives, I think. Why are they both still vanity? Yeah, and because even the foolish and the wise still end the same way, right? Eventually, they both end the same way. No one, the wisest man on earth doesn't gain a benefit of earthly longevity. In that sense, wisdom is better in folly because of the foolishness we can get into, but they're both empty in the sense that they end the same way. How does the inevitability of death shape his conclusions? We've been talking about the whole time. Right? What a waste of time, right? If all my pursuits were about earthly things and human things, and I stayed up at night, anxious and worrisome over all these earthly thoughts and challenges that I was experiencing, and it took me years and years and years to all of a sudden realize that it was all just useless waste of time. Yeah, and whatever I actually did gain wasn't going to be mine for very long. So death kind of helped remind him that there are some more important things than he had focused his attentions on. And I think that's the lesson for us, is we shouldn't look at death in some fatalistic way, but we should look at death in a real way, that it happens, and it happens to everybody. Irregardless of where they find themselves, whether wise or foolish, whether honoring God or not honoring God, it finds everybody eventually. And when it does, do you want a life that was spent in earthly vain pursuits, or do we want a life filled with dedication to God from start to finish? How do we want to look back at that time? I think that's what he's driving at as death kind of shapes that for him. What tension exists between enjoying life's blessings and recognizing their temporary nature? Okay, so that we can be overly consumed to the point where we don't even realize that everything I'm gaining eventually is going to be in somebody else's hands. And think about that question, though. What tension exists between I want to enjoy the things that I have in life, right? I want to find certain earthly joy, but I can become so overwhelmingly consumed with that I forget that all of those earthly things they're temporary in their nature. And if you put your trust, your confidence, and all your energies towards the temporary, what happens? Yeah. The floor gets pulled out from under you eventually, right?
You might forget your spiritual.
You become disconnected. And so there's a real struggle, a real tension between finding fruitful ways to appreciate and enjoy the life that God blesses us with without being so consumed with it that the minute the temporary is taken away, all of a sudden we don't even know what to think, act, or how to behave, because all of our energies and time were placed in those temporary things. How does this chapter address the human desire for control over outcomes? Yeah, it's empty to think you can control it, right? It's empty to think, right? We can control our actions. We can control our thought processes. We can control how much time and energy we place in certain pursuits. There are certain things that are well within our grasp to be able to have an effect upon and control in that sense. But you never really control the outcomes. You don't know. Your labor may come back fruitful. Your labor may come back empty and vain. You might have pursued some portion of wisdom, some understanding, some knowledge in some earth, and it not come back as being as beneficial as we once thought. You've heard me illustrate that. If you ever walked into a like a dollar store, I guess we got to call those $1.50 stores now. But anyway, but right, and you find this it's wow, that's the coolest thing for $1 I ever saw, and until you bring it home, and 30 seconds after you get it home, it breaks, right? It was the greatest value known to man when I walked out of the store. And then when it breaks, we say, well, at least it was only, at least it only cost me $1. At least I didn't, right? Wow. 1 second, greatest value ever found. The next second, well, it was worthless anyway. That's exactly what he was saying, by the way. That's kind of what he was saying. Is we convince ourselves of certain values of the things in this world. And then all of a sudden the world reminds us maybe those things didn't have much value at all. And now what? And so there is this real challenge between these things, and we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. And we can't control the outcomes. And so it's best not to be anxious and worrisome and all that kind of thing over things that are outside of our reach. What does the preacher say about the person who inherits the fruit of another's labor? Yeah, you got no idea, right? How they're going to handle those things. And then how might this chapter influence our view of work and ambition today?
Not so overly consumed, because in the end, it's a little temporary.
Right. The effort here is to give us perspective. What real benefit does this work have? And if we're in recognition of what God is doing for us through the process, then we've got the right perspective. If it's all about me and the earthly pursuit, he warns us, I tried that and it didn't work out so well for him. Oh.
Did you ever, example I thought of was, did you ever hear a lot of people say, like, the most beautiful homes in town, and that older people that, or they weren't old when they got them, but through the years they kept them just as neat as a pin and this and that and all. And then we say, wow, wonder what they would think now.
Yeah.
You know, something.
Yeah. When it ended up in somebody else's hands.
They don't, like, they wouldn't know. But,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we don't know.
Right. You have no, and all that energy and effort.
Not that it was bad, it was a nice place,
Right.
I'm not saying.
And there's the Proverbs will deal with that, right? When it comes to those kinds of things. But you're right. I think that should teach us, right, to keep perspective on those things, because we've witnessed that, where you see something that was so well maintained and so well kept for so long, and then the next guy, doesn't have nearly the same desire to maintain that at all. Yep.
Also talks about keeping the perspective of not to go so far the other direction that you don't enjoy anything. And that you can enjoy those gifts from God as long as you keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think he does. That's kind of what he's saying. You can be so quick to hop to the next thing and to the next thing and to the next thing, you don't even appreciate the one you're at. And that's kind of the way he did. He never really slowed down to appreciate any of it. He just kind of was jumping to the next and the next. And I think he does kind of warn us about that at the end here. And say, listen, slow down and appreciate what God's doing for you. And think about what the hand of God is bringing for you in your life. And stop and pause and think about it. Rather than just jumping to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. Or jumping to the next concern, to the next concern, to the next concern. Be careful about that. All right, jump to chapter 3. Yep, go ahead, Bob.
Verse 9 on your chapter 2, where it talks about all his endeavors and everything that he tried. His faith still stayed with him. His wisdom, I should mean to say. I get from that he could lose his wisdom. Is that applying just to Solomon, or is that applying to us also, that we can lose wisdom of God?
Well, I mean, I think I think his description is about the fact that even though he pursued all these earthly things, he still retained what God had granted unto him. His circumstances obviously a little different than ours, because none of us have direct wisdom bestowed upon us like he did. And so he probably but I think you can. I think the truth of your question, though, and answer is yes. I think we can lose wisdom. I think we can get so clouded by the things of this world, our pursuits, our selfish desires, what we're trying to grasp for pleasure. And all of a sudden, those things become such an interest and focus to us that wisdom that we once had about how God would want us to behave and act is gone, because we've let our minds be clouded by everything else but what God would want. So I think in that practical sense it can happen.
I don't think you could lose wisdom per se, but I think, you could be so clouded to the point to where you've just chosen not to use it, and it's kind of one of those things that a lot of people will, it's in the back of your mind, back in that cloudy space where you just choose not to forget it or choose not to use it, and you just need reminded of the fact, hey, you need to be following this.
And I think that's another possibility, that the idea is that you didn't necessarily, it's not like it's gone, it's just been overruled by something else. Although the Bible does talk about a seared conscience, and talks about the idea that a conscience can be so seared that it doesn't even have the ability to recognize what God would want. And so I think both are true. Both of those things can happen, where in one sense it can just be the cloudiness of what's blocking our ability to remember. But I do think there's senses that it just is gone. I mean, some of us can't even find our car keys some days. And it's just gone, right? Every day, Mike says. Need an air tag on it, Mike. All right, chapter 3. Yep.
Question 7 we just went over, which refers to verse 21. How can inheriting another man's labor, say you inherited through a family thing or whatever, it says this too is vanity and a great evil. How can it be evil?
You talking about inheriting the benefit of somebody else's labor? Yeah. And again, keep in mind, he's the tricky part about the book of Ecclesiastes is he's giving you his perspective on what he witnessed and saw as the outcomes of certain pursuits. I don't know that he's saying it must be this way. What he's saying is, this is what I did, and this was the result of that. And so I don't think, and I understand what you're saying, I don't think when he says that, let's look at it again, verse 21, for there is a man whose labor is in wisdom and in knowledge and in equity, yet to a man that hath not labored therein shall he leave it for his portion. This also is vanity and a great evil. Number one, it's vanity and a great evil on his side of it, where he has spent all his life pursuits have been about building bigger barns and putting more stuff in it, only for that to be just left for somebody else. I think he's making that statement on his side of the conversation, not necessarily on the recipient's side of the conversation. All of his energies and efforts and things that he did, it was just vanity and a great evil that I spent all this time storing away all this stuff, not only to become another man's, but think about it for a minute. And of course, he wouldn't have been able to foresee it necessarily, but a lot of those things ended up where? In the hands of whom? Think about that. All of Solomon's wealth that was stored up everywhere in all the temple and all of his homes and stuff. When the enemies came, and finally overtook Israel, then Judah, they took the spoils of war with them. And so think about that. I think he kind of begins to realize that he's accumulated all these things and he's got no idea. And obviously didn't, because much of it would end up in the hands of his enemies. So I think that's his perspective here. There's a warning, I think, for people who receive without having to work for it. There are other Bible texts that kind of address that subject matter, but I think he's dealing more from his side of the perspective than he is somebody that receives it.
It says portion. Mine says legacy, which we think of as an inheritance.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a necessary evil inheritance.
No, I don't think. Yeah, and again, and I think that's the perspective, right? He's not, and that's what I mean by he's giving you his perspective based on how he lived his life. And so he's not saying that it can never be done properly. He's just saying, this is what I did, and here were the outcomes because of it. I don't think this is a repudiation of the idea of leaving an inheritance. It is a repudiation of leaving an inheritance at the expense of all the worry and anxiety and earthly pursuits and time wasted just getting stuff to leave to somebody else. That seems to be what he's driving at here in this text.
I mentioned that for the other day, the inherited wealth, and
It didn't affect him. Although I could give you anecdotally examples of others that it wrecked. Yeah. So, any other questions? Good questions. All right, now let's go to chapter 3. Because familiar part of this book, right? Because he just lists things that happen in life. And he says that basically there's a season, a time, to every purpose under the heaven. And he just kind of starts making contrasts. He says there's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal. That's an interesting phrase, by the way. Try to look at that a little bit. Your idea might go to war. The only problem with that is he mentions war later. If you in the list, he'll mention war, and there's a time for war and a time for peace. He'll mention that later in the text. So either he's being redundant, which I guess would be okay to be, or there's something else here. And from what I could read. There's a couple of different ideas about it, but the idea is that sometimes in order to be healed, in order to get healthy, you might have to cut away some things, right? You might have to do some things first. And so the word here, many argue, that's the idea here, that you might have to make some sacrifices in order to eventually come to the healing process. And because war and peace come later in the conversation. And I don't think he's advocating murder. And so I think they're probably right, those who looked at this phrase or this word, that there's a time to have to do things sacrificially to our earthly temple in order for it to have the time to heal later.
Well, certain times of the year for your food.
Yeah. Potentially, I wouldn't know what the time to heal on the other side of it would be, though. You know what I mean? Because that seems to be he's talking about two different perspectives, but could be. But so there's a time to break down and a time to build up. You know, that's hard to appreciate sometimes in life. Sometimes we try to fix a problem by building on a foundation that's already shaky. And when you're trying to fix a problem, but you're trying to build that solution on a foundation that already has its challenges. Sometimes in life, the way to be able to build again is you gotta start all over. You gotta demolish what's there. You gotta demolish what's there. It's got to go. And by the way, I don't think he's talking about people, so be careful. But right, attitudes, actions, choices. We may have accumulated negative choices in our life to the point where the answer isn't, well, okay, from here on. No, the answer might be, I got to get rid of all this. I got to break this foundation away. I got to remove all these things so that I can start building again, because I want to build it right. And so there's a time to break it down, and then a time to build it up. There's a time, he says, to weep, and a time to laugh. There's time for all of it in life, right? There are going to be moments where weeping is the appropriate thing. There's going to be a time where laughter is the appropriate thing. And we're all going to experience both extremes. That's part of the human experience, is that we're all going to, at some moment or another, either have those moments of weeping and have those moments of, there's a time to mourn and a time to, dance a celebration, right? All of it comes to all of us. And yeah, and I come back. Well, I'll pause because there's more to talk. But there's a concept here that I want to make sure we're seeing. It is the writer says, right? There's a time to break something down, and then build. There's moments in life where weeping is appropriate, and a time where laughter is appropriate. Here's the warning. If we get fixated on any one side of those things, we miss out. If our life is consumed with weeping and mourning, we might not ever see the laughter. We might not ever experience the time to celebrate. If our hearts and our minds and our thought processes are always on weeping and mourning, we're going to miss out on the other side of that. If we're always just tearing down, when are we ever going to build? When are we ever going to grow? And so the warning here is, don't get fixated on one side or the other of these things. It all comes to everybody in life. Respect whichever moment you might be in, and don't let one or the other so overwhelm that we don't accept or experience the other side.
The other extreme of it, or the other end of it, that I think we could possibly appreciate, is the fact that he breaks them apart, saying instead of saying there's a time to mourn and laugh, there's a time to kill and heal, he separates them. There's a time to kill and there's a time to heal. So they're not at the same time. So don't try to rush it. Don't try to push them together. Maybe one day I'm going to be breaking down who knows what, like some barrier, like maybe I have with someone else. But that, as you're breaking that barrier down, that also isn't the moment to, build something up either.
Right. Each has their proper place in time, and and might have to embrace the one we're in for a little while before we can have the other and experience the other.
That's the language of this whole thing. It's not or, like you were saying. If we focus all our attention on one, then we're not getting this, because it says and.
Yeah.
It's It's not a time to mourn or a time to laugh. There's going to be time for all those things.
Yeah, yeah. A time and place for all of it. Yeah, yep. Yeah,
Whatever season you're in, I mean, we might think that we would like to have just a constant rays of sunshine in our life and just what, the pursuit of happiness or whatever, but that's, all of these things are unnecessary.
yeah. And it's interesting, and we'll take, when you think about that, and you think about the practical side of this conversation, he lists a whole lot of other things that illustrates the same point. But I think we can look at that practically in two different ways. We can look at, number one, individually, which is kind of what he's talking about, right? And we can look at it collectively, too. Sure. I think you're right. I think if we never open ourselves up to experiencing both sides, it's hard to appreciate them. And I think that's true. And I think we learn. I believe we learn from that as well, that as an individual, that each season comes and it's okay, right? It's okay that the season of life I might be in the moment may be one of these things, and it's okay. It's okay. I think even from a church perspective, we can even think about that there are seasons. There's even seasons to churches. There's seasons of growth. There's seasons of decline. There's seasons of sustain. Right? The churches experience those things too, and I think sometimes we can become discouraged individually. We can become discouraged as a church when we don't feel like it's always harvest season, or we don't feel like, right, or we feel like it's all. Sometimes we go through all the seasons, and sometimes the season we may be in individually may not be exactly where I want to be, but it's the season I'm in for the moment. And I'm going to live through that. I'm going to trust in God through that. And I know that through the wisdom of this writer, that on the other side eventually comes a time for the opposite. And I think that happens even among churches, where those seasons come for congregations as well. And we can appreciate that from that perspective.
Would you rather, feel happy 100% of the time and feel no sadness, or would you rather, go through life having to feel sadness, and you may pick feeling happy all the time, but really you'd want to feel sad, because if you felt sad sometimes, you would never really feel what true happiness is.
And I think there's some level of truth to that. I think maybe even one step beyond that is the realization that we don't get to pick the time. We don't always get to pick the time. The day of mourning may just come. It may just come. I didn't choose it. I didn't want it. I didn't expect it. It just came. Celebration arrived from a source I didn't expect, a situation I wasn't familiar with, a circumstance that came up that had, no right, and now I'm in dance mode. I'm in celebration mode but I think we've got to appreciate that we may not, we don't get it, we don't know the outcomes. We over pursue it sometimes, where we're trying to create the seasons as if we could control them. And you can't. You don't, and I don't have the power to across the board control every season of life that comes. It just happens. And so embrace it. If it's whatever season it happens to be. If it's a time to rend something and used for some other purpose later, then rend it. If it's a time to sow, then sow it back. There's a time to keep silent. Hardest one in life, right? Know when that one is. Know when that season's going on sometimes. Time to be silent. But there's also a time then where speaking is appropriate. Our challenge is knowing the wisdom of which is which. And we tend to sometimes not recognize the season of silence, and we're speaking through it. And sometimes we don't recognize the season to speak, and we're quiet. It's challenging, but yet there's seasons for both of those things. There's a time to love and a time to hate. Some translations may use the word disregard, right? There's a time to appreciate, and there's a time to say, no, you know what, that has to be disregarded in my life. Much what like Jesus taught, right? Man loves father, mother, son, daughter more than me is not worthy of me. He that does not hate his own life, right? He uses that kind of language to help us understand that there are going to be seasons and priorities that we have to pick. A time of war and a time of peace. All of this, all of these seasons come to all of us. And so rather than trying to manipulate a season of mourning into a season of laughter, or turning every season of celebration into a season of sadness, why not just embrace the season we're in and let God's handiwork continue to shine and put forth its benefit to each of us. Appreciate the thoughts this evening. Lord willing, we'll come back there to chapter 3 on Sunday morning and continue this discussion that he has about these things.